Welcome to the super powered team up the hip hoposphere has been calling for. That's right. This is the rap music plug. He's our Psylocke. He's slinging blades from his mind. Ro. And we've got Roger CamoBucketHats as our gambit. Finger gloves, jacket ready to go. And I am your host. I am your humble nightcrawler of the situation. This is Dan-O. I represent Freemusicempire. This is our Sleep Sinatra Summit that we brought together from the discussion online just after DivineNation, which is his third release of the year. It is May. I'm not even sure he's done.
I don't think he's done.
So thank you for joining me, gentlemen. I appreciate taking the time from your day.
Appreciate you having us.
Yeah. Good to be here.
Roger, I'll tell you. Everybody says they want to live in nature until you go on a walk and you come back with 6 ticks on you.
That's not good. Lyme's disease, not a joke.
Nature, you're getting dissed. So anyway, Roger, what was your reaction to Sleep Gloriously when it came out? Did you hear that when it came out?
When did it come out?
April.
You said it that
end of March, April.
March, April.
March.
So,
I think March.
I think you're right.
I heard it. Yeah, I heard it around that time. Sleep Gloriously. I thought my first reaction was I wasn't as enthralled by it as I was by Routes. Yep. It seemed to meander a little more conceptually. And he seems a little underconfident in his vocal approach, but I came to sort of appreciate that he doesn't have the same vocal approach every time he makes an album.
Yep.
And that subtlety is a significant strength of his. And that sounds like a cop-out, but I think in his case, it's singularly true that the subtle variations in how he approaches actually just rocking on the mic make his albums distinct. So Sleep Gloriously is something I came to appreciate with repeated listens as I just got into the intricacies of his delivery, which turned out to be a lot more interesting than the previous releases. But initially I was thrown off. I was thrown off and a little disappointed, but that happens with artists who put a lot of thought into their music. So I'll say that.
That's such a great summation. It came out March 5th, by the way. March 5th, according to his Bandcamp. So I think that's a great description in terms of, I was overwhelmed because it was like peanut butter on peanut butter to me. It was like so much what I like. He has a very soulful voice, and Ed Glorious is just the king of like those tight sample loops. Where the people are screaming, just like hitting the high note of you can almost see the Stax Records artists like sweating, hitting the high note, and then cutting that fragment and just making it go the whole time. So it was like soul on soul for me. It was like a warm blanket, and I just fell into it. Bro, what was your Sleep Gloriously take?
I feel very similar to how you kind of put it, the soulfulness in Ed's production. And I think that was probably, that was my first introduction to Ed Glorious, actually, was that album. And you're right, that classy boom bap feel with all the soulful samples, it just played so beautifully. Because Roger, you're making such a good point. The Sleep's approach, I don't think it actually necessarily threw me off, but I definitely really noticed how much more like restrained, but it was mainly like in relation to the content. He was just so much more like he's always introspective, but I think this one was even more than DivineNation or Routes, it was that much more personal. And I think he treated it like that. He was very delicate and like calm and like precise with everything he was saying. And I think it just all like mixed so nicely with the instrumentals. So I really liked it. I definitely really liked that album. It was really strong.
The other thing about Sleep Gloriously, and this is true of Sleep Sinatra, and why, like, I honestly, when I was first thought when I was doing this was, oh no, I'm becoming the Sleep Sinatra guy, right? I did the interview with him. I've done like a lot of these reviews on him. Like, I'm just like telling everybody to listen to Sleep Sinatra. And then I was like, if I'm the Sleep Sinatra guy, that's not a bad guy to be, you know? So I got a chance to sit with him and talk to him about Sleep Gloriously and what I thought it meant, unpack it with him. And for someone like me who really likes nerding out with albums, getting to the deeper contexts, Sleep is perfect. He always gives you little phrases that mean a lot. So I dug it. April 17th, Scribes of Tahuti with Kennedy Krills came out. I didn't pay much attention to it. I honestly thought it was like a Lucy collection or something, leftovers maybe, that he had somewhere.
Yeah, I thought it definitely didn't have like the ambitious scope of like DivineNation or the real like really focused subject matter of Sleep Gloriously, but I think it was definitely a quality release. It felt much more like, not only having fun's the right word, but it was just more like, let's make some songs that we sound good together making, and they did. Like Sleep, like I think a song I remember writing down that I really liked was Crisis Fatigue. Just really great display of how amazing his flow is. Like he is such a master at kind of like being really low key or being a little more energetic. And yeah, and I like that classic hip hop feel, like that intro, that scratching intro. Oh, I love that shit. I was like, that is beautiful, beautifully done.
Yeah, no, it's like like everybody's favorite album, Nelly's Sweat and Suit double disc. Sometimes you want to see, sometimes you're in the suit and you're ready and you're putting on your best bets. Sometimes you're in your sweats and you're just doing it. And I think nowadays we see more of the different kinds of releases. Some of them being just kind of, I'm going to go nuts over some beats, and some of them being like, this is a journey and I want you to have this journey. So, yeah, Tootie felt like getting loose, getting it out of his system for me.
Yeah.
What did you take on it, Roger? Did you hear it when it came out?
No, unfortunately, I slept on this one. This one missed me in the flow of things.
Can't catch it all. But DivineNation drops, and he had warned me in the interview. He had said, "Look, I might drop more." Like, he's like, this isn't over. So a DivineNation came out, and I listened to it, and I really liked it. But I don't know. It's like I was in a monogamous relationship with Sleep Gloriously, and I was like, that's my album, and I kind of stood by that. And then you were both talking about it and how great it was, and I was like, I gotta go back to it. And I was just like, damn, there was so much there. Ro, talk to me about the production on DivineNation.
Man, the production, like, it was such a shock. Well, no, it wasn't a shock on this album. It was actually a shock on, and I know I'm gonna butcher the name. It's like, I think it's like Joaquin Fox. I'm just gonna. Yep. I literally always say Joaquin Phoenix, like it's just so similar. Like it isn't, but it's just like terrible to me. I'm like, oh yeah, the Joaquin Phoenix. I'm like, no, it's not his name. His album, Won't Hide the Madness. I'm not really remembering how I even stumbled upon it. I think because Blood Money Perez is on that. So I was like, checked it out and I pre-ordered it, thought it was really dope. And yeah, I listened to that a couple of times. Like, man, the production on this album is just outstanding. It's like exactly what I like. And then I see this Sinai guy who's
Mhm.
produced like half the album or a good chunk of it. And it was only a few days later where it clicked that he was Sleep Sinatra. And I just was like, I don't remember the time I've been introduced to a producer who also raps and raps at such a high level to where you would just assume, I just assumed, that guy's a lyricist, he focuses on the rhymes and that's just his thing. And that's totally fine. But to hear he was so realized and he had this such a developed style and it was already this good. And I know that he actually started like making beats was one of his like first things, and he kind of shifted focus to rapping. But the production on this album is genuinely one of the best productions of the year for me. Like he has like this, he has like these like warm analog bit reduced kind of tones and like the keys and a lot of the samples that kind of run through that filter that just give it this like, yeah, this really like ambient like tape hiss kind of feel. And then the drumming, I love the drumming. I love how icy and like sharp, and he just like really just did a lot of things, a lot of detail in it that was absolutely phenomenal. And he also like switched things up, like the downers. I felt like that one was like a beat that sounded like it should have been on Sleep Gloriously, although it fit, like it still worked, but it seemed a bit odd on this album. And then he has like that ridiculous bananas Ezekiel's Craft. That's just like a psychedelic dream. But yeah, I remember like Sleep's Fortitude and Rubble. Those were probably my two favorite beats. Just that like string sample was just like marvelous on Sleep Fortitude, and the percussion on Rubble. Like I don't know how to describe it. It's just like skipping towards the end of the bars, like it's just like everything I want in production. It was this. So I was thoroughly impressed.
That's awesome. Roger, did you know going in that Sleep produced his own stuff, or when did you get on board with Sleep?
I didn't know that there was so much self-production on this album until I had heard it once. And then I noticed that, and it might have been Rohan here who pointed that out. And that shocked me, but then it didn't, because there was something about the album that seemed consistent, even as it sounded eclectic. And my initial thought was like, wow, the various producers were on the same, similar enough wavelength to piece this together. And then they sequenced it really well somehow, communicating across the ether. But then I figured out that he had a central role in it. Yeah. And I'm like, okay, he knows how to produce for himself. I feel as good as he is in picking beats from, really good producers like August Fanon.
Yeah.
There are times over other producers' beats where I felt his performance could have been a little sharper in a technical sense, or he made decisions that were interesting, but not necessarily aesthetically the best. But on these beats, I just felt like he was just in those pockets in a way I hadn't really picked up on before. That's just my take on it.
Yeah, I wrote when I wrote the review of Routes, right? I coined this term Dragic flow. It's a celebration of Goran Dragic. And I was like, basically, Goran Dragic is a kind of point guard you can just give the ball to and you're not worried. It's going to take care of it. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of how I feel about Sleep, right? You can hand it to him, you're not worried about it. But on Routes, I thought he really kicked it up a notch. The hooks were different, right? And he was getting a little more bluesy with the delivery and stuff like Flawed Design, all some of these things where he was really working his voice and working the hooks in different ways. And I thought it kind of kicked things up a notch. And I think he's been growing and learning and getting better and developing. So I can see him learning lessons and getting to DivineNation, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does. And
I feel the same way.
His songwriting on this is something that I actually noticed too. Was a pretty steady improvement. Like Sleep's Fortitude, that track again. The hook on that I think is the best the
Yeah.
smoothest, the most catchy thing I've heard him do. And I was like, damn, I think he's really been improving that. I've noticed that as well. So I was impressed in that sense as well.
Hooks were highly meaningful, highly condensed on this effort. They were just very well crafted.
I'm glad you talked about how meaningful they were, because some of these hooks. I mean, you listen to what the hook is about. It's really unbelievable how much he can do. I think one of the what I was kind of taking notes on was traits that Sleep Sinatra has that I really enjoy. Right, characteristics. The first one I put down was efficiency.
Mm-hmm.
There's not a word wasted, right? He doesn't have any of these kind of lazy
Like filler
bars
bars, yeah.
that you see people repost and be like, oh my god, he just rhymed chicken with chicken. What is going? You know what I mean? He everything means something, and when you grasp it, when it hits you, it's like, ooh, yeah. And some of those tracks, they hit me right off the bat with how deep they were. Uh, I have a lyric from my favorite song of the album, "The Downers." Uh, he says, "Hung over our heads like it's a thick noose. Kids picking and choosing from either dreaming or getting loose, while America pickpockets our identities, alienated labor, a false sense of the remedy."
Yeah.
He hit a lot in that. And it when that song ends, I gave like a literal sigh, like a, whew, we did a lot there, you know?
Yeah.
He had a lot of lines like that.
What were we saying, Roger?
I was gonna say on that set of lines in particular, he's able to perform a kind of analysis that doesn't always come across so efficiently in hip hop. Although hip hop more than other genres tends to tackle it. For me, those lines had to do with kind of racially specific nature of capital exploitation.
Yep.
And the class cleavages that come out of it. So when he's talking about labor, he's pointing out that even when you are cast aside as surplus labor or a superfluous labor force, right? After your worth to the American empire has been exhausted in terms of your productivity, the capitalist system still finds a way to extract value from you, even in the realm that most people assume is merely cultural. It still becomes a real value
right
in the world. And other artists in the past have been efficient in pointing this out. On Nas's debut, particularly on his verse on Life's a Bitch, which always gets overshadowed by AZ's, but is actually a lot more meaningful. We'll get to that later. But that was the first time I can remember like that level of analysis being executed in rap. And it's just really refreshing to hear someone in 2021 take on that level of ambition, but with so little pretense. You could miss this if you're just listening to the song and enjoying it for its more obvious qualities. So those lines stood out to me as well.
That's thank you for that analysis. I appreciate that. Ro, what were you going to say?
No, what I was going to say is that I think he has a really good, like you said at the ending, the pretense. That's what I really like about Sleep, is that he's very efficient, like you said, and he just says things in a way that have a lot of deep meaning, but they're also pretty digestible. Like they're not like super heady, complex word choices all the time. and it's not always this really like obtuse thing to where you have to be like an absolute like sociologist or something like that to understand. And he also mixes it too with some like nice clever tongue-in-cheek. It's not necessarily, I would say, funny, but it kind of is. Like the line, I think it's the first line on this whole album is like, hail a cab, like I'm trying to flag a taxi down. Like that's an earwormer, but it still has like a meaning to it. It's just funny in a way. I find like because obviously J. Cole's album came out recently, right? And I find like Sleep does what J. Cole and J. Cole's fans think he does, which is like that
I was
common
about to say
man.
this. I was
Yeah,
about to
yeah, I
say this.
love it. I love it.
I was
He
about to bring
does
this
the
up.
he does that common man. He has that common man role where he says things in a way that people from various backgrounds can digest it, can learn. He doesn't do it in a judgmental way either, and he kind of just meets people where they are, but he's actually saying something very insightful that isn't just surface level. And I find that's where J. Cole, I think, attempts that, but he just doesn't have the knowledge, or he doesn't communicate it. I don't know if I'm not going to say he doesn't, but he doesn't communicate it in a way to where I'm like, oh, that's really interesting. I'm just like, okay, you're saying something that's like nice to hear. It's like cool, you're like agree with me, I guess, but it's not like I'm getting anything from that.
Yeah, Rohan, I think that's sharp. I think one of the reasons that Sleep is successful at this is because while his choice of language is appropriately accessible, what he doesn't delve into are cliches. Some rappers will string together aphorism, bits of folk wisdom, commonly assembled phrases, bumper sticker style slogans. Busta Rhymes does this for whole albums.
Yep.
Which works when you have like a highly stylized MC like that. It works. It makes the songs meaningful.
Yep.
It makes you want to repeat them. When you're talking about MCs that are trying to speak to social realities, like Rohan has pointed out, it could make for some really probably unintentionally shallow kind of poetry. It can result in that, but Sleep chooses simple words, but does not choose words that are highly expected or predictable, and that makes an enormous. It's very subtle to the listener's ear, but it makes a huge difference when it comes to the meaning of things.
So good. I was going to build on, say everything your explanation, Roger, of what that meant, the downers, but presented in almost a crime writer's efficiency. I think like crime writers, they really try and explain an entire character in a paragraph, right? Boom, here's this sentence, here's that sentence, and like you're in the setting, and now boom, here's the point.
So that's a good observation, because going back to what I was saying about Nas's sort of innovation in this field, the thing that Nas did that was different from everyone before him, instead of just saying the US empire and capitalism is evil because it treats us poorly and reduces us to slavery, he explains concretely the method by which that happens, and then demonstrates how that same exact method of hyperexploitation is used when people move from the streets into the music industry, into the business of selling music. So with Sleep, it's interesting that you say that the important thing here is that I don't know if it's his lived experience. I don't know the gentleman too well. You've spoken to him. If he hasn't experienced firsthand trying to survive in an underground economy, he understands it intimately.
Right. Yes.
And he's able to speak about it plainly, without glorifying it, without romanticizing it, but talking about how the plight of most working people is beginning to resemble that kind of life or death hustle, those kind of compromised choices, those kind of hopelessly bleak scenarios. Yeah. And it's really important for rap music to do that, because rap music never went through a phase where the majority of the participants doing it ever got comfortable
Yeah.
doing it. It's always been hyper exploited from jump. So there's nothing to recover, right? You got a couple of billionaires who've emerged in the last couple of years, but most rappers and most of the people that rappers are trying to talk to right now in this world are attempting the grind that Sleep describes in minute detail.
Yep.
And it's important that there's some rappers who stay true to that.
Yeah,
and
I mean,
devote their art.
I've said it before. I think rap music is one of the only places where America openly discusses poverty. The rest of the time, we're kind of trying to not do it. But so going back to the smoke, we're going to throw at J. Cole a little bit. And I've heard a lot of J. Cole. I've been covering him for years and years and years. I've heard everything he did. What I would say is, whenever you have these hives, right? These internet hives that are like completely dedicated to these artists. And when the off season came out, the hive was like, this puts him above Nas. Like the off season skit, now he's better than Nas, right? And you have to look at that hive and don't think of them as like sick or deluded. They need something. They're looking for something to follow, a set of characteristics. And I think Sleep has what they think Cole has. The efficiency that Cole does not have. He does not have the efficiency. You could Google bad J. Cole lyrics. You've got lists for days. It's been rough. But he also has, and this goes into my next personality trait, he's got what I'm calling a Ka-like menace. So Ka always felt to me like a tough older uncle who came from some shit and is now wiser and is going to tell you some horrifying stories for a while.
Interesting.
And that's kind of the menace, the distinguished menace that Sleep brings to a track. Someone who used to be nefarious, but he now wants to be a better man, but don't test him. The old instincts will come out.
But with Ka, you can't miss it because Ka really telegraphs that aspect of it.
Sure.
Yeah. And I'm not saying that that's not disrespectful. Ka is masterfully good at that. And then he incorporates, the Greek and Old Testament kind of motifs into it. So it has this the sense of importance to it, this sense that you should pay attention to it. Sleep doesn't do it in that way. Sleep does it in, I don't even want to say every man. I don't think it's entirely every man, but there is an understatedness to it that I think a lot of people would miss, not because I think people are dense, not because I don't think people can connect to this material. I just think there's a tricksterish element here. He's sitting you down. Maybe he's next to you at the bar. He's going to rap to you in a real way. And you might be 45 minutes into it until you notice that he's said some things that delve a little bit more deeply into a complex issue than you expected entering. At least that's how it worked for me.
Yeah, no, I think there's a direct kind of, when you're talking about Ka, right? Street poetry meets samurai, street poetry meets chess, and it's understood what's going to happen. And with Sleep, it doesn't seem that direct. What do you think of all this, Rob? Sorry, we've been talking.
No, I've been just really enjoying. I've been really enjoying the points you guys are making. I see that subtleness too, because I would say my first real introduction to Sleep was not too long ago. It was with Routes, and when I remember listening to it, I remember I went to at least 2-3 listens before I started to pick up, because especially I had no context on him really. I know who he collabed with. That's about it. And I was like,
exactly.
am I missing something? Because it actually sounds like he really is talking about a lot of stuff that, a lot of like a really tough past, some things he had to do, some decisions he had to make. I know with Routes specifically, the thing I always took from it is like, it's a lot about just like difficult decisions and routes you have to take in life. And that doesn't come across because he doesn't, like, I think it comes back to like, he doesn't pander. Because there's like, I'm not saying all people do this when they're more direct, but there are rappers who just kind of like throw in aggressively literal and direct street subject matter just to like kind of like fill in a box to grab fans. And Sleep doesn't do that because you can tell he treats that with care, and he treats that with respect, and he doesn't like try to glorify it, and he also doesn't try to like put it in your face as if it like means more or less than what it means. It means exactly how he says it, and he likes to control the narrative, I think, of how he's perceived.
And like you said before, he avoids the obtuse attempt to kind of foreground it in unnecessary abstraction as well.
And that's
Mhm.
the
He
key.
does both of those things. That's not easy. That's not just on a poetic level. We're not talking about simple things at all.
No, and the that's the key thing, is because when you put all this work into all these layers, right? One of the first things you want to do is get all your credit. It's to say, look, this shit is smart, you know? Yeah. And he avoids that.
But look, but listen, he's wise to that.
Mhm.
Okay. So he says the black man has been weaponized, deemed ruthless. White liberals want a photo op just to prove shit. He
That's
knows
still the downers, isn't it?
Yes, he knows
Mhm.
that the majority of artistic decisions that he make can potentially be co-opted by
Mhm.
this system and turned into a manipulative distortion of what it was intended to convey, and that every decision he makes is a different route with a different set of contradictions. This is there's an intentionality here.
Mhm.
I actually didn't hear the interview you did with him, but I'm going to check it out. I don't know if he spoke on how intentional he is about writing his lyrics. A lot of artists will play that off and say, "Oh, I just wrote it down. I threw it down. I just let the fans say these things." But I mean, on this album at least, and definitely on Routes as well, um, without the sort of telegraph of the
Right.
themes, he is doing things in a consistent way for us to remark upon the patterns.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
I have a lot of respect for that. I have a lot of respect for that.
One of the things we talked about in the interview was this kind of industry of pain, right? This kind of, and I don't want to call it a UK industry of pain, but some of it is a UK industry of pain, where there's like UK rap labels who are putting out like street stuff, and the more painful it is, the more violent it is, the more higher it sells for. They're kind of like goon rappers in fancy sweaters, um, charging hundreds of dollars. So, and we talked about it, and we talked about like white people listening to street stories and just kind of hunting this pain.
Mhm.
And I just knew he was the right guy to talk to about that. I don't know. I just knew it. And it was an incredible conversation. And he was super aware. Like, it was like, if you're not acknowledging the person, then you're not in this for the right reason.
Yeah, I think that's well said. And it kind of is a similar concept when people talk about these topics in movies. Like the common thing is, we were done with the slave movies. That's what like lots of, like, I'm not saying it's right or wrong. A lot of people feel that way that are black, feel like they were kind of not towing the right balance here. And it sounds like to a lot of people that we're just kind of profiting. This is again becoming an industry of pain, and that's like visual too, and it's to a larger scale, I would say, and money wise too. So I think again, when we think about these kinds of topics, Sleep proves that you can tackle these topics with the respect but also the nuance, because it is always kind of like a contradiction. It's not like talking about these things is inherently wrong. It's not like talking about things in a very direct, like grime or something, like a lot of trap music does this. It's all in the details, it's all in the framing. And I think Sleep is a master framer, if I
He
can put it
really is.
that way.
He knows himself like on a natural level. Like, there's he says, stay rising and won't lapse, energy of the youth and wisdom of an old cat. Hermes. And I just like, you're the one who gets to sum yourself up in such incredible way. But yeah, it's because I remember somebody saying like, "How old is this guy?" When I had him listen to him, I'm like, I don't know, man.
Mm.
It's kind
He
of
could
an
be 28. He could be
right,
45. I don't know.
kind of an eternal.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's Ro, talk to me about the voice because one of the traits is the thick, rich soulfulness of him. His voice, his passion and emphasis are soulful. His ear is even more soulful. So, well, how do you take the voice? How do you take it on DivineNation?
I think DivineNation, it's really funny you mentioned that because I had a note down because I think it was so subtle, but I think it really spoke to the intimacy of the record and the rawness. In general, he tends to mix his voice in a way that's like very like sounds like it's very close to the mic. You hear a lot of the I think not dissonance. There's that word where you hear the S's on a mic. If anybody knows that word. No,
I
no one
don't
knows
know.
it. Anyways, it's a thing. It's a common thing, and that's why you have the pop filters a lot on mics to kind of
Yes.
reduce
Yep.
that.
Right.
Yep.
And there's a line on Sleep's Fortitude. I think it's when he says white passing. That line whenever he says white passing something,
Mhm.
he almost sounds like he's literally like just like made that sound right on the mic. And it did something to me. The song is so angelic and so sentimental and one of the most like climactic moments in terms of the emotion of it. And that just added such a rawness to it. I think in general, the way he mixes his vocals, though, generally speaking, is it's very intimate. It's very calm. So like it sounds like he's barely even raising his voice up an octave. Like, yo, I'm performing now. I'm gonna start rap. I'm put on my rapper voice. Sounds like he's just talking, but it's so clear and I like that feeling. It
Mhm.
does something to the messages. It kind of makes it feel more genuine, even though it's completely an aesthetic thing. But that's
Yep.
what music is. It's all a series of decisions that lead to something. And I think he does a really great job of that. Like Huss Kingpin does that, but to a different reason. I feel like it gives that like slickness. Like when we did
It's a
the
strut. It's a
yeah,
strut, right?
yeah,
His
yeah.
flow is a strut, and
Yeah,
that's
he did like that thing.
good.
You said
Yeah.
he's
Mhm.
whispering sweet nothings on Portishead, and that's exactly it was perfectly said.
Yep.
And I feel like he does it for a different reason, and I think it achieves the results it wants to.
Totally.
Interesting.
Go for it,
Interesting
Rod.
observations there. Oh, I was just gonna say, um, yeah, the fact that on that track, that you mentioned, Rohan, that he was speaking in this deceptively plain way and sort of eschewing the idea of being over dramatic or using a lot of flair to draw attention to oneself. I thought it was interesting because it sounded like that verse was aimed squarely at Logic.
Oh,
If I read
Oh,
it
I
correctly,
have that line down. That's a beautiful line. Damn.
um, because he says the comment about white passing, and then towards the end of the verse he mentions, "I'm the only Sinatra." He
yes.
says something about being
I
the
got the
only
line. It says, "So I'm gonna keep my
Sinatra.
logic on a swivel. It's the only Sinatra gaining props that's original." And
There you
I
go.
thought he was going at Nancy Sinatra. I was like, holy shit. The boots are made for walking. This is a mess.
I don't know if he was going directly at Logic. I think he was going directly, at least for a good portion of the album, or not the album, that song, on the idea of Logic, though.
Yeah.
That kind of like the white passing, all of those ideas of how the industry kind of favors certain artists and doesn't, and kind of again kind of it goes to the hyper exploitation
Right.
themes that he always talks
Yeah.
about.
The institution of Logic
Yeah, the
Yes,
institution
that's
of
is,
Logic.
I think, the
100%.
target of.
Yeah.
Because if you look at the problem people have with Logic's bars, it's that he has super simplified, adorable bars, and that so you can kind of put them anywhere, right? You can put them at the end of Rick and Morty, and it's cool. And that's got to get on Sleep's nerves. Like, he put so much work into all these things, and so that's I understand that. That's it was a heck of a thing, and but you're right. He's so slick that you might not even catch that. You know what I mean? That this Logic thing. You might just think he was clowning Frank Sinatra, which he was, but on the side. Uh, See, one of the things that I think makes Sleep an important part of 2021 music, period. And we've kind of talked around it. He's self-sufficient while fitting anywhere, right? He lights up guest spots on albums while making his own beats and putting out his own projects with minimal help from others, right? There's no big names on any of his stuff. It's not even something he desires, I think. He is self-built proudly, and the skills he's gained himself. And so he wants to do it himself. And there doesn't feel like a lot of compromise in there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that does.
He says,
Here you go.
go ahead, Ron.
No, I was saying I agree with that. And one of the thoughts that I had was that 2021 really put the Sleep Sinatra brand at a new level. Because now when I see featuring Sleep Sinatra on someone else's song, it gives me that feeling that all the great artists, all the ones that I have very high confidence in, it's like, oh, not only do I think the song's going to be like legit good, but it legitimizes the artist too. I don't have an example on the top of my head, but if I hear an artist as featuring Sleep Sinatra, I'm like, oh, this artist must be pretty dope. Like Sleep doesn't just throw out verses for money. Like he does it for artists that he fucks with. And then simultaneously, and it happened with Teller Banks actually, because I saw him on Routes and then I heard him on Sleep Gloriously, and he killed both his features.
Yep.
And then that made me think that kind of he has that effect on his features on his albums where I'm like, oh, Teller Banks must be someone I should check out. And I did, and I was impressed. He has especially that project with Ed Glorious. I love that one. I think that is not, again, I'm new at least to end of 2020, started 2021 to him, but I already see that growth. I already see that journey. And I think he's really kind of solidifying himself in this year.
Definitely. What were you going to say, Roger?
Oh, I was going to say, regarding self-sufficiency, I feel that on this album, that concept is tied to a class imperative. So on Rubble, he says, we the answer. And he's talking about the lumpenized working class that's been pushed out of legitimate work and has had to make decisions that the mainstream society considers immoral. Just to eat. He says, I've been chiseling with these mouths to feed. And chiseling is a very intriguing way of describing making music for a living. It's not the typical analogy that rappers would drop, but in his sense, it makes sense. And then back to Technicolor. When your brain's a commodity, they want a piece of intellectual property. Guard your ideas, stay rooted in sovereignty. So rappers before him had figured out that there's a hyper exploitation that occurs as you go from the streets into the studio. But rappers in the past have kind of chalked that up to the way that things are, that's a current system-wide phenomena and it's here to stay with us for a while. In tracks like Rubble and Technicolor, Sleep is describing the situation as all of that is on the decline, right? Kind of like how, you had that Fondulum raucous era of rappers that forecast an imminent apocalypse of that exploitative industry and anticipated the ability to be independent in its wake. And Sleep seems like he's talking about what actually happened after it actually eventually did implode upon itself and what the sort of emerging contradictions are now. It's a very current record in that way. It's very attuned to what's going on in the moment.
I mean, and to build off that, I was just listening today. He has an album called No Anthems, and it is dedicated to Mahmoud Abdul Rauf. And specifically because Mahmoud Abdul Rauf was one of the best and was blackballed from the NBA in 96 ish for refusing to stand for the anthem. And Rauf was on the cover, like praying, and I mean, you can really feel the connection there. The Sleep is like, I'm not moving from this spot. I don't care what it costs me. So at first I didn't think he wanted to be big. I thought he was like fine being underground and just doing his thing. But when I heard Routes and I heard how big the songs got, I thought he might have some designs on building up. And now I think he's at a little bit of a crossroads with that.
That's an interesting point. I'm not positive again, as someone who can't say I've listened to all of his music, but I noticed one thing that was interesting, and maybe it's because he again produced it all, but that Dreamscape tag he kept putting, I found that very interesting. It felt like it was on, I think, almost every song. And I found that interesting because it sounds like he's building something, and one way to do it is branding. And even when I remember speaking to it, I know some other previous collaborators, they were using that term. Well, I mean, not that term, but saying Dreamscape, that group, that collective. And I think I find that very interesting because I take that line that you mentioned just a moment ago, Roger, about chiseling with these mouths to feed. Like chiseling, again, it's a good word because I think he's trying to say that it is imperative, and he's the way, like he's kind of saying, like, I'm sharpening my sword, I'm getting better at producing, I'm getting even better at rapping, I'm getting better at creating these albums. I'm doing that and that's how I'm going to survive. Like, that's going to be my way. And I think it almost comes off like a duty. It's like he's doing it for his kids or something, obviously doing it for the passion, but there's something in there in what I just said that I find is really powerful, because it definitely speaks to like the struggle right now in independent music and trying to actually make it without completely just selling your soul or trying to cop out the art to just make a hit and get a bullshit label deal.
I think it's because the chiseling is really important because this is an entire landscape of self-sufficient artists who have no labels to help them, no real industry to develop them, who are doing a lot of it themselves, right? Teller Banks produces by himself. Like, there's a lot of these guys who are producing their own stuff, who are circulating with their clique or people they know on social media, and are developing their own music and their own brand. There's so many of them, it's hard to break out. It's chisel. You got to chisel away to get your own piece of it, and I think that's one of the things that I saw as, like, if I was going to say the next level, the next challenge for him is Sleep Sinatra with his consistency. He doesn't really do singles or standout anthems that define him. It's slow burn, and some people don't learn that way or love artists that way. Kendrick had the same problem, right? Kendrick early on, he had everything everybody wanted except these kind of lead singles that would pull people in. And I think that's probably the next challenge for him, because that's Sleep Gloriously is a cohesive package. It doesn't have a song that stands above the other songs.
Do you think that's something that he wants? Like based on your read on him? Because I don't know, because I'm a person, again, I don't think I'm the majority here. I think I'm the minority, where an album that if I had to choose between 12-track album where 3 of the tracks are like legit amazing classics, and then the 9 are just like kind of mid or just like, decent, versus an album where it's 12 songs and most of them are pretty, like they're definitely good to really good and it flows well. I almost always want that. I'm so allergic to listening to singles now. It's my least enjoyable thing. If someone say, "Oh, you check out my music," it's like, if you don't have even an EP, I'm like, you have to be special for me to care. And I don't know if maybe that's something he even wants. And I'm curious to see where that goes, because singles, people do singles still, even in the underground, and I think it works to varying degrees. But I'm curious to see if maybe the listener of in this space maybe is more like, maybe I'm not as much of a minority in this kind of realm of listeners. In the
I don't think you
general, I know
are.
I am, but
I don't think you are. I mean, in general, yeah, but I think, yeah, and I am an album guy through and through. I don't know if he wants that or not, right? I think he's teased in both directions a little bit. And whatever he wants to do, I want him to do that, right? If he wants to just be like album guy, making it his way, 100%. But a big song that what it can do is kind of like a slogan. It can sum up your agenda in one song, right? Uh, and if he wants that, that would open the door to new people. But honestly, that might be an old model that I'm talking about, right? Uh, Nowadays, you keep releasing, and eventually you hit. You know, I don't know. I don't know if Freddie Gibbs had a big single, right? He just kind of kept going.
yeah, that's a good point. I don't think he had any. I think obviously Pinata is the one that broke him to
But that's an
the
album. Yeah.
masses. But that's an
Right.
album, and
Yeah.
he had some singles like Thuggin' that were really successful. But it was again the album that solidified it.
Mhm.
That's a good point. I'm not sure.
So Raj, what do you think? Do you think he's settled into this mold, or do you think there is a temptation to go broader?
There could be. I don't know if it can answer that. What I would say is, based on what we understand about this album, there's an awareness that every decision um, puts you across a threshold where a new set of contradictions emerges. And the chiseling metaphor works to that because you can tell by the way that he describes his upbringing and his experiences in life that he is talking about emerging as a man into this world out of humble origins, right? The rubble
Yep.
of late capitalist America. But then he talks about chiseling, and chiseling is a process that creates rubble. So is the point of chiseling to fashion something coherent, digestible, and marketable, to make a claim that your labor has some sort of value? Or is chiseling the creation of a new set of conditions in which you can thrive according to your own volition without being destroyed by the same process that you've been resisting the whole time? Is it creating a new set of rubble in which you can actually hide in this uncertain landscape? Like, I think he's asking that question. I get the sense of someone who realizes that, when you're good at what you're doing, there's going to be expectations that you expand upon it, that you refine it, that you bring it to a larger audience. And he's also aware of the destructive possibility of going through that process, and the soul crushing
Yep.
possibility of this becoming a job, of it being dictated by someone else's will.
Right.
And there's a certain wariness of that too. So I think those things are all at play, and I think that's what makes this album special. It's just been a long time since someone has devoted this much effort to these themes in this plain, accessible but still complex kind of way. It just doesn't happen all the time.
Yeah. No. That's a great way of describing it. You either eat or you're on the menu. Like
Yep.
that's and I think the cycle is there, right? The cycle of like, you cause this destruction, but if you don't, you're destroyed. Uh, and I think that's part of the cycle is laid out here. But you're right. In some sense, it kind of feels like uh, a conversation he's had with you throughout these songs.
Yeah, and I think what we're talking about here, if we're trying to like determine like where we think he's gonna go, I think it's largely based on a conversation that I always have internally and I've been having for the better part of the last year, especially as I feel like since the pandemic, I was always into like a lot of underground rap, but it's been just like exponentially more into this scene now. I'm very curious to see in the future, in 5 years from now, will we get a more fragmented or siloed hip hop landscape where the underground is really focused on like just being self-sufficient. They're not worried about like to these ideas of trying to make the anthem, trying to not necessarily cross over is a kind of an outdated term either, but just trying to push to have an expanded audience that's at a larger scale than most underground artists, and then let the mainstream guys do their thing? Or are we going to move to a hip hop landscape where it's a lot, the lines are blurred to where, and because I kind of see both things happening. I feel like people like Sleep and a lot of these artists that are in this kind of signal to me that they're trying to make a new model where self-sufficiency, just building on your fan base. Like you may not be driving in Benz and Bentleys, but you'll be making living comfortably. But then I also see a lot of evidence of the other, where you see artists like, maybe he's still very popular, but like Navy Blue, like I found he's an odd one because he just seems to be, there seems to be a lot of artists that seem to be crossing over in terms of the high level mainstream almost underground, and then the actual underground. There seems to be very little blur. Akai Solo and Navy Blue, I think that's a good example. Up until recently, Akai Solo, I don't think had that profile that Navy Blue has, but they just make an album, and that kind of thing seems to be happening. So I'm curious to know if those lines will blur or it'll go in the other direction. I think both things are happening, and I'm not sure which one will emerge.
It does feel like a second economy, right? Like Young Thug and Sleep Sinatra don't seem to be on the same planet together. It's that's just how it is. Where, yeah, it's a second economy, but thinking about like word of mouth and how word of mouth has elevated through the underground. Like Billy Woods has been putting out albums for a long time, and people like I wasn't aware of. A lot of people weren't aware of. But there was a word of mouth movement that came about of like, you got to hear this shit. This guy's amazing. And maybe that happens for Sleep Sinatra. I hope so. He's in Nebraska and he's not in New York, and I think that works against. I think regions still are a thing, right? And if you're in New York or LA, you've got more footing. Just how it works. But I don't know. It's yeah. But there's a lot. I mean, it's the production wise. I wanted to say production wise, the feel for the production for this album for me was that he creates these beautiful sounds and then he like scratches them and breaks them and destroys them. Like he'll take a beautiful sample and just as he lets it ride, he'll like kind of skip it, double play it,
warp
in a
it,
weird way, warp it and make it creepy, it kind of feels like keeping you awake, like don't get comfortable, boom, and there's a lot of that purposefully, like not, I don't want to say not pleasing, but not pop, right? Purposefully experimental sounds.
And it's a really interesting mix to have a lyricist like that and a producer like that, like a producer sound like that. I really don't have many artists that come to mind. Like Earl Sweatshirt is like the only one that's like when I think of like a premier lyricist in my mind, but has such a eccentric, because there's a bunch of rappers that are very good producers, and there's like too many to name now, but there's very few that are really supremely good lyricists that really push the boundaries producer wise. That's not something that I find is very common. Because even people like I'm trying to think of some like mainstream examples, like again, like J. Cole we mentioned. I actually like a good amount of the beats, but I never, even when they're good, they're so safe. They're so like, oh yeah, like he's just making a hip hop beat to match the raps he's gonna do. Whereas this kind of producer rapper is, I'm making a beat that's like challenging, that's pushing the boundary of something that is really intentional, that has like a life of its own. Like if this was a beat tape, I would have loved this. And I could never say that about 90% of producer rappers. Navy Blue, like they have an identity. I guess that's where they have an identity as a producer, whereas a bunch of rappers just produce decently well. That's the key difference.
Yeah, no, I think I first became aware of that, like that there's a lot of great rappers who are also great producers during the mixtape era, right? Cole produced the warm up and all the mixtapes he was doing, and they were good. Big Crit,
Big
just
Crits,
really great stuff uh, with producing his own stuff. And there was just a whole class of people like, you're like, wow, he produced it too? Like, I just kept having to say that over and over again. Like, um, so this is an era of that, but amidst that, because the first Sleep album I heard was Sleeper Effect. And my favorite song on it is number 7, I think, On Earth as It Is, which is a great song and a great sample, but it's very like he pulled the sample, he made it work and made the track. This feels like him playing and experimenting with how he can do it more. And it fits what he's trying to do lyrically with, the simplicity versus the depth in an interesting way. So, Roger, is DivineNation better than Sleep Gloriously for you?
Yes. Yes, it's a more successfully realized at the lyrical level, and I find it more interesting to listen to, and that's without denigrating the other album.
Sure.
I just find it to be more successful, and just it's more in the moment for me in terms of its social relevance. If I know that sounds weird because they're both very recently released, but for me, it just what he said just resonates so specifically with what I think is going on in the world. I just have to give it to that. But both fine projects. Both fine projects.
I think Sleep Gloriously is a little more personal, with Judith and with these songs about relationships with friends, and it's a little more like of him talking about where he is and how he's developed. And this one is Sleep kind of telling you about the world. And so it's why I think Sleep Gloriously is still my favorite. I love that personal journey. I love Ed Glorious's production, but this one's climbing. It's really good because it's really fun to have all of his wits at use, like just pulling everything apart and putting them back together.
Good point.
So yeah, what do you think, bro?
I think definitely this is my favorite out of the two, and I think it's the favorite period that I've heard. I think there's a brevity and a leanness to this album that I think even on routes, I feel like I remember thinking that, like I reviewed it as well, where I thought like, just simple things. Like sometimes I'm like this beat could have just like, didn't need to loop for 30, 40 and minute after the last verse.
Right.
I thought one thing he did amazingly well here is that the hooks were better, but they were also as needed. Like he didn't add more than there needed to be. I felt like routes, although the hooks were very meaningful, they sometimes like I just didn't think. I think he could have just cut the hook and just kept the verse, add another verse, or kept only the verses, and it would have just hit harder. And production is just, this is very much up my alley, and the type of experimentation, but with like the knocking drums, all of the like the tones that I described are just like really something I've been really liking. My ears been loving recently, and I think it's close, but it's also, but I think I'm very confident to say I like DivineNation too. And one thing we didn't mention quickly on that album is that the title DivineNation, like a nation, one nation under God. Like these are things, I'm not American, but I know that's how people talk about American. I think they're a bunch of like slogans that go to say something. So DivineNation, and the fact that he's very much unlike Sleep Gloriously, he's looking a lot more outwardly. I liked that. I liked that feeling, and I like how his production kind of brings you into a world. It's like an alternate look into the same America through his like cool, trippy production, psychedelic production, and his very distinct point of view.
Yep. The is there anybody, if we had our pick for which uh what underground rap producer we'd want him to work with? Do we have any that would be best for him?
Oh,
That
that's
would be
really tough.
dreams
Just to produce, no other help, just to
yeah,
produce the
just
beats.
like just a full album with Alchemist, or whatever. Like
Okay, we're including like underground A-listers to like Optimus. Okay, damn, it's a good question.
Obliv,
ooh,
Oh,
that's a
that's
good
good because he can go so
because
many places.
I think it would challenge him in this sense that Obliv makes songs that could legitimately be R&B bangers
one.
from 1995, but
Right, right.
it has that kind of nighttime flavor to it.
Mhm.
Kind of there's a swankness even when it gets dirty, even when it's deliberately distorted to sound almost like you're tuning a clock radio or
Mhm.
something. It's still there's this certain sparkle and element to it, and I think that would challenge Sleep to talk about the contradictions that he does in a manner that he hasn't quite yet attempted.
Right.
That's just my sense of it.
I think that's a fantastic one.
That's a great pick. I was thinking maybe like Exile or Odyssey or Black Milk or somebody like that. Some like
Makes
Exile
sense.
can do really bright, sunny, like kind of standing at the top of a mountain, soulful beats. And and I think Sleep would make those a little more sinister and bring some darkness to it. I think that would be fun contrast. Yeah.
True.
I think for me, my pick, I really like Obliv. I think that one was like a really
It's a
good
great
one. So
pick.
I don't know if I can beat that one, but in the spirit of trying to like think of something that would be a great mix, but would also kind of be different for what Sleeps put out,
Mhm.
I think something like Preservation. Like I'm
Ooh,
just thinking of like I'm thinking of his beats that are particularly on the more free, a lot of space, a lot more like free jazz feel, like what he did on Brass. Like that's a perfect example because I don't think we've seen Sleep operate without often without like a some form of like a somewhat traditional or at least like a groove.
right,
Preservation
right.
really just kind of like it is like just like these fluid beats, free form. I'm not sure how that would actually sound, but I trust Sleep that he could pull that
Oh yeah.
off. And I feel
Oh
like
yeah.
that would just be really interesting. Like I don't really know if that's the best
No,
combination,
I think
but
it's
it would be
fantastic.
so intriguing to me.
Yeah,
It would be so intriguing to me.
such a good call. I feel like I have the weakest pick of the three. That's awesome. That's great. You guys are killing it. I would say the last thing I would talk about in terms of Sleep and his imprint of 2021, when we're talking about albums and how important albums are, is the replay value. The replay value when you've heard an album and loved it more and more each time, and you've heard it 6 7 times, it's the relationship's different. The relationship you have with it is different. And Sleep, I don't know how he does it, but he finds these grooves, he finds these stash spots for important ideas that you don't find until the third or fourth listen.
So what hit me about this album was that in this weird ass global virtual disconnected age,
Mm.
I managed in real time to develop some memories about replaying this album. And actually, I was chatting with Rohan like in the middle of the night on Twitter saying, I've just listened to this for the third time. I've just, this Rohan's like young enough to be my son.
Right.
I just want to
Right.
put it out there. I just want to show you what kind of bridges
That's fair.
we're building here. So I say that to say that I'm from the era where we used to knock shit like this that was new and exciting in the Jeep. We
Yep.
used to have it on the box, on the basketball courts, the handball courts.
Mhm.
It'd be playing at the bodega, right?
Right.
Like this is the experience of being part of a phenomenon around an album. And it's not something that occurs very frequently anymore. We all know the reasons why. We don't have to
Yep.
over intellectualize it.
Sure.
But this album, because of the qualities that you described, Daniel, it rewarding multiple listens, but also being just cleverly enticing enough to draw you in to that process, allowed me to experience this kind of thing in a modern form, but reminiscent enough. And not everyone's going to be able to pull that off now. And it says something about the album.
Yeah, no, I think when you talk about reminiscent of the way things were, I think Crate 808 podcast just had a great crossover episode with Call Out Culture podcast about Jeru the Damager, the sun sets in the east or rises in the east. And that's like a classic album.
That's a
Some people know it's a classic album.
Mhm.
You know, the dude who did the Boondocks is like, "Come Clean's the best beat of all time," and we're like, we're connected. But like, so we would just live. I just lived listening to Jeru the Damager, but no one knew who he was, and no, I could never get anybody to care. But like, that was my guy because I just lived in that album and I could live in it. It was great to live in. And this definitely feels like that, like a weird hidden classic kind of thing. Yeah. So that's awesome. Epic replay value. How has the replay value been for you, Ro?
Very high. I've been weird. It's been weird. The last 2-3 weeks, this album's been out for like 2-3 weeks, I think. I've just only ran back albums that I've listened to like 10 plus times. It's been a weird Akai Solo, Navy Blue. I've listened to that like 10 plus times. I listened to I don't know if you guys know of $2 Will and Iceberg Theory, Butte Chips. I just fucking love it. And it's vastly different. That album I've played, like, I'm not even joking, like I think 10 times in like 3 days. I've been so stressed and it's just been beautiful to kind of keep me sane. And yeah, I've just been in a mode where I've just been playing music back. I've not been, I think it's because I've been really busy. Whatever I've got my hands on, I've been like, all right, I hope you're good. And I'm just going to keep playing you because I don't have time to look for anything else. And the replay value on this was very rewarding. And a lot of that had to do with the production, which is not usually, even though I've liked the production, obviously Fanon, Ed Glorious, but this one really drew me because I was so enticed by the instrumentals on this. It's so up my alley, so like consistent with my preferences in music. There's a lot to chew on in the details.
Yeah. No, if anybody's looking for this $2 Will Iceberg Theory Butte Chips, Iceberg told me, think Action Bronson from a red state. And like middle of Montana, and there's meth addicts and bikers and soccer moms. And it's interesting. I think it's an album that gets better as it goes along. I think as it gains steam. So I would say be patient and get into it. But I mean, by the end, he's even sampling some really weird, old, fun stuff.
Oh yeah, this is like, I think both their best work. And $2 like one of those guys where I can't really describe what that exact thing is. Like, he's very clever, but there's just something about how he flows that I know and I can guarantee, even for people like me, because when I first heard him, I was like, I'm not really sure if I like this. I'm not really sure what this is. This seems so awkward and like stupid, but then I'm like, oh, it's actually pretty clever. And there's something with that flow. It's like it's self-aware. It's just like, he knows how to do that style. It's just very entertaining to me.
And to bring it back to DivineNation, what's so interesting about it is, in order for an album to have replay value, you have to be able to get comfortable in it. And somehow you can get comfortable in DivineNation, even though it has jagged sounds and hard topics of discussion. The ease and humanity in which he addresses the audience makes it warm when it shouldn't be warm in a way. Does that make sense?
No, it does. It really does. I also think the pretty nature of some of the samples, like it's very jagged in like the drums and the patterns and the glitchiness, but a lot of the production, like sample wise, otherwise the keys super pretty. Again, really warped, and there's always something off about it, but it's something really pretty and just like eclectic, and like I feel like I can see synesthesia. I can like see the album. It's very bright.
Yep.
When I hear it.
Yep. No, when you were saying, bro, it's like it just fits all of my tastes. That's how I feel about a lot of what Sleep does. It's just it seems like it's tailored for me. I described him when I did the interview, and I said a mixture of Gil Scott-Heron and AZ.
Oh, yeah, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. I like how Gil got social when he talked about politics and everything.
And I was, because there was always a real warm humanity in Gil Scott-Heron where he cared about everybody involved in the story, and I think he has that in what he does. So I don't want him to be my pocket artist who's like the guy I know is good. I want everyone to know Sleep Sinatra, to be honest. I think if a lot of the people out there heard him, they would not necessarily get smarter, but feel more empathy for people.
I think it's the empathy. He even tweeted it once where he said something like, I'm not gonna try to paraphrase, but he just basically said something along the lines of like, how are you basically like trying to be, like on the right side of history, trying to be someone who's quote unquote doing the right thing, but you judge all of these people who come from these backgrounds that you supposedly empathize with, and you just judge them on like some of the beliefs they may have, when you simultaneously are ignoring all of the conditions to which, maybe that wasn't something that they were exposed to and all of that. I think he has a very real way to cultivate empathy that doesn't feel bumper sticker, doesn't feel like love yourself. Like it seems very rooted in a reality that's calculated and understood and genuine.
It feels like him rebuilding himself into a peaceful person when he's not naturally a peaceful person. Like when people at work will say, "Oh, Dan, you're so nice," and I'm like, I'm actually a dickhead who's doing a really good job of being nice. Like I'm working really hard because I don't like that I'm not nice. So I feel like there's a little of that with Sleep where he's like, he's not naturally peaceful or, not aggressive. So he's trying to be the person, and his kids are a big part of his rhymes and his discussion. It's a point of communication. Like, I've got to be this so I can teach my children how they should be. Parenthood is a very important part of his moral identity, but his intellectual identity. I think it feeds a lot of his thought process on these issues. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think you said that well.
Good deal. Any other thoughts, Roger? Are we on this?
Yeah, I think Sleep Sinatra, I think he will find the audience that he's seeking. I think that it's a very clever balance of ideas and approaches, and he as distinct as he is, he also represents something in this moment that is starting to cohere, perhaps slowly, as a movement. I think the focus on the class imperative and the 5%er references that are used just sparingly enough to not become didactic.
Right.
DivineNation, and that's out of the Supreme Alphabet.
Right.
But it's also two very commonly understood words in English, right?
Sure.
He signals in a way that's similar to someone like Jeru the Damager, which to me suggests that there is an audience similarly broad for him to tap into, and he's interested in figuring out the method to do that because he describes it in detail on his songs. So we'll see. We'll see.
Yeah, no, it's because I think it's important to keep in mind that rap fans are not dumb. There are dumb rap fans, but there's a large percentage of rap fans who really do pursue complexity and like lyricism and meaning. And there's a lot. Sleep has a lot of friends because they all know he's great. You know what I mean? They all know he's really gifted. So I don't know anybody who's familiar with his work who doesn't like his work. It's just getting people to know his work, you know, which is not the worst problem to have, you know?
No, there's a lot of possibility in it.
Yeah.
There's a lot of possibility in it.
There's a lot of people who people are very familiar with their work and they're like, I don't like you and I don't think you're good. You know, that's much worse. Yeah. So, but yeah, there's possibilities, and 2021 has really sparked possibilities for him. I'm glad he's doing. Everybody kind of does this year now, where they release a lot in one year to really solidify who they are. Iceberg Theory did this, I think, last year. There's just a lot of people trying to really put their name down. This seems like his year for that. And I love it. I'm here for it. So, any parting wisdom shots, Ro? You say something mean about somebody? You want to do it?
Say something mean about somebody. I don't have anything mean to say.
Cool.
I was gonna throw a shot at Logic, but I don't.
He's got
fine.
enough.
He's got enough. He's got enough shots. I know we usually do. I don't know if it's on the state of the game. We do those recommendations at the end.
Recommendations. Let's do recommendations.
Yeah, I was gonna, because I actually finally had one prepared. The album right in my background, Cities of Eve, Crashing Sound of How It Goes. Just reviewed that one. One of the best albums of the year. Just genuinely, just mind blowing. I don't even want to say more. And then the other album I also just reviewed, but it's really, really interesting. And I think if you like this album's production, it's not that similar, but the percussion is Wiki and Nas, Telephone Booth. That's an album. Yeah, that was another album I've listened to like 15 times. It's also very short.
Right.
And I just can't get enough of just constantly replaying it. And it uncovers some grimy detail. And just like, I love Wiki. I feel like I love Wiki more than a lot of people, because it's not like there's one thing. He's not like the best lyricist. He's not the best flow, but there's just something so raw and gritty that I really get something for. So highly recommend that album.
I'm with that. The my recommendation, because I told Roger before we got on that I'm hoping I had a scheduled interview with Doof, so I'm very excited to talk to Doof, and my recommendation would be Doof and Gray Matter, Radioactive Spinach. Doof has this kind of X Factor madcap energy. He feels like the supervillain that the superhero can never predict the next movement. And I think that's something rap always needs. Rap always needs somebody who's just doing whatever they want, you know, and exploring the space. And over the Gray Matter production, I think lyrically that's his best. It's great. That would be my thing. Roger, anything you want to recommend?
I echo Akai Solo's latest. Kai Solo's just bugged. But it's always a satisfying listen. It's not simple. It's not for everyone. But then it kind of is. So I
Talk about
suggest everyone
replay
check that
value.
out.
The replay value is
Yeah.
unbelievable.
And works well with Navy Blues production in a way I wouldn't necessarily have anticipated. I love the feel of the album. And then this one isn't one I hear a lot about, but it's Snagglepuss, Bronx Dundee. Snagglepuss is a rapper from the 90s who used to be on mixtapes, has a kind of cartoonish sounding voice, was kind of thought of as like either underground or a gimmick, but he was incarcerated for a while, came back, made some more music, puts it out quietly. I think it's with some Australian producers, so there's this weird Australian motif going through it, and it's just pure rhyming. It's hilarious, witty, a lot of observations about life after prison, but done in this just highly comical punchline, almost like he's been watching battle rap nonstop since he got out.
Awesome.
And it's short, and the production is all sounds more legitimately like a revival boom bap than others that claim that and
Right.
kind of fall short. And I just can't imagine people not being satisfied by it. I'm actually surprised it doesn't get mentioned more, because nothing about it disappoints.
That's awesome. I haven't heard that myself.
Me
I gotta
neither.
check that out. That's awesome. And so, I would say, parting thing, Naomi Campbell, you were always my hero, still are. And good luck to you on this new journey. So, thank you, and good night.